Imagine you are sitting in the CEO's chair of a rapidly scaling company,
Okay.
and you have a massive problem on your hands. It involves your head of sales.
Oh, man. The classic executive crisis.
Right, because this executive is, without a doubt, the hardest working human being in your entire building.
Yeah.
I mean, they are swiping their key card at 6:00 a.m., and they're the one turning the lights off at 10:00 p.m.
They bleed for the company.
Exactly, and everyone likes them. The culture respects their sheer grit, but there's a glaring, inescapable issue.
They're completely in over their head.
Completely. The market has shifted, the company has outgrown their specific skill set, and despite their superhuman effort, they are fundamentally failing to do the job you need them to do.
Yeah, that's a brutal spot to be in.
It really is. You know, in your gut, you cannot keep them in this role. The business is suffering, so you have a choice to make. And your instinct, the very human, deeply empathetic instinct, is to find a compromise.
Because you don't want to fire the hardest worker in the company.
Right. You really don't. So you decide to demote them instead. You bring in a seasoned heavyweight above them to run the department. You let your loyal executive keep a smaller role. And you basically avoid the agonizing pain of firing a good person.
It feels like a brilliant, compassionate win-win.
It really does. But by making that seemingly empathetic choice, you have just triggered a hidden chain reaction that is going to systematically rot your company culture from the inside out.
That scenario right there is the ultimate trap. And it perfectly encapsulates what we're unpacking in this deep dive today.
Yeah, we are getting into the heavy stuff.
We really are. We're stripping away all the superficial aesthetics of leadership. You know, the ping pong tables, the visionary speeches, the standing desks.
The organic snacks in the break room.
Exactly. And we are analyzing the raw, hidden architecture of human behavior. Because managing a group of people, whether it's a 10-person startup or multinational conglomerate, it's not an engineering problem.
Right.
It's the act of taking highly irrational human beings, confining them in a high-stress environment, and essentially attempting to forge a functioning civilization.
Which is incredibly hard to do.
It is. And to do that, you have to understand structural forces. The philosophical bedrock of our entire discussion today comes from a concept heavily emphasized by Ben Horowitz in his Y Combinator lectures.
Okay, let's unpack this. What's the concept?
He argues that the single most vital, yet universally misapplied concept in management is understanding the unseen audience.
The unseen audience. Let's dig into that because it immediately highlights a massive blind spot we all have.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when you're sitting in a room having a difficult conversation with an underperforming employee, your entire psychological universe naturally shrinks down to just the two of you. You're managing your own anxiety, you're trying to manage their emotional reaction, and you're just trying to navigate the immediate tension of that specific conversation. It feels like a completely closed loop.
It feels like a closed loop. But the reality is that the walls of that office are made of glass.
Right.
When you make a critical decision as a leader, you cannot merely calculate how it'll be interpreted by the person sitting across from you. You have to meticulously calculate how that decision will be interpreted by the entire unseen organization.
The people who aren't even in the room.
The people not in the room. They are watching every single move you make.
Yeah.
And they're not judging your intentions. They are looking at your actions to draw massive structural conclusions about what is actually valued, what is actually punished, and what the real rules of your civilization are.
Regardless of whatever aspirational nonsense is printed on the company values poster.
Exactly. The poster means nothing. Your actions mean everything.
So bringing it back to that hard-working, failing head of sales, in the room, that demotion feels great. The CEO feels like a benevolent leader who protected a loyal employee.
Yep.
And the executive is definitely bruised, sure, but they're incredibly relieved they don't have to go home and tell their family they got fired. They can spin a demotion to their professional network as a strategic transition.
Oh, totally. A new focused role.
Right. The crisis feels averted. But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. Isn't loyalty rewarded? It feels like demoting them is just fixing a leaky pipe by diverting the water to the guest bathroom. You're keeping the water in the house, but is that really a bad thing? You're saying this win-win is just a localized illusion.
It is entirely an illusion. And to understand why, we have to look at the cold math of the power dynamic through the eyes of that unseen audience.
Okay, let's do the math.
So this failing executive was brought in to run a major department, which means they hold a massive equity package. Let's just assign a number to it to make it real. Let's say they hold 1.5% of the entire company.
That's a huge chunk.
This is massive. Now, let's violently shift our perspective away from the CEO's desk, and let's look at this exact same demotion through the eyes of a brilliant, highly effective junior engineer sitting out on the floor.
Okay.
This engineer is shipping flawless code, working weekends, and fundamentally driving the product forward.
Yeah.
But because they are junior, they might hold, what, 0.1% or 0.2% equity?
Which is a fraction of what the failing executive has.
And that is exactly where the structural integrity shatters. How does that junior engineer process this event? They watch the head of sales fail at their job. They watch them get demoted because they couldn't compete in the market.
Right.
And then the engineer realizes that this person who objectively failed still holds 15 times more equity than they do.
Oh, wow.
The engineer is suddenly struck with a paralyzing realization. They think, wait, I am crushing my goals. I am carrying the weight of this product. And this executive who botched the strategy gets to walk away with 1.5% of the company.
It's like keeping a condemned building on prime real estate just because you feel bad for the architect.
That's a great way to put it.
You're completely blocking new development, and everyone else in the neighborhood has to look at the wreckage every single day. You have just shattered the illusion of a meritocracy.
Completely.
The unseen audience, the engineers, the designers, the junior sales reps, they don't see a compassionate CEO saving a loyal friend. They see a rigged system that explicitly rewards failure.
You have just reset the cultural bar for the entire organization.
Yeah.
The invisible message you broadcasted, louder than any all-hands meeting, is this: effort without results allows you to keep your top-tier equity. You've taught your staff that actual success is secondary.
Just show up early, look busy, and be buddies with the boss.
Exactly. Maintain a good relationship with the CEO, and your wealth is protected regardless of your competence.
If I'm that high-performing junior engineer, my motivation instantly flatlines right there. Why am I agonizing over the perfection of my work when the guy who completely misread the market is still holding the golden ticket?
You wouldn't.
But let's take it even further, because the fallout isn't just about equity. It's about the operational reality of the department the next morning. You demoted the old boss, but you kept them on the team.
Yes.
Then you go and hire a brilliant new VP of sales from the outside to fix the mess. That new VP walks into their first team meeting, ready to implement sweeping changes, and sitting right there at the table is the old boss.
It is an impossible situation for the new leader.
It really is.
The demoted executive still has deep, multi-year relationships with everyone on that team. I mean, they probably hired half of them.
Right.
Even if the demoted person is trying their absolute hardest to be a good sport, they inevitably become a lightning rod for resistance. Every time the new VP introduces a process that is uncomfortable or difficult, the team will naturally look to the old boss for their reaction.
Oh, man.
The old boss becomes an accidental insurgency leader, a shadow manager.
You're forcing the new VP to fight a ghost. Every water cooler conversation turns into, well, that's not how we did it when John was in charge. You haven't fixed the department. You've just paralyzed it with divided loyalties.
Which leads us to the agonizing truth of leadership.
Mm.
Firing that executive is brutal.
Yeah.
It requires looking someone you genuinely like in the eye and saying, you do not get an A for effort. You get an F because you failed to deliver. It's a conversation that will ruin your week and theirs.
For sure.
But as a leader, your fundamental job is to absorb that intense, localized, short-term pain in order to protect the long-term structural integrity of the company for the unseen audience. You are sacrificing your own emotional comfort to preserve the meritocracy for that junior engineer who is actually building the future of the business.
That really reframes the entire concept of empathy in business. We usually think of empathy as being nice to the person sitting right in front of us.
Right.
But true leadership empathy is having the foresight to protect the people who aren't in the room from the downstream consequences of a weak decision.
That's exactly it.
And if avoiding punishment has these massive hidden ripples, then the inverse must be just as volatile.
Oh, it is.
Let's look at how this applies to rewarding success. Specifically, the danger of the squeaky wheel. Because if an employee failing is the hardest conversation, an employee succeeding and asking for a raise feels like it should be the easiest.
Right. On the surface, granting a raise to a top performer feels incredibly validating for a manager. Let's build this scenario. You have an exceptional employee. They're indispensable.
Okay.
They walk into your office, confidently lay out a meticulously researched presentation of their accomplishments, note their rising market value, and formally ask for a raise. The manager's immediate visceral reaction is relief and excitement.
Because you want to retain them.
You want to retain them, you know they deserve it, and there is an undeniable dopamine hit for the manager in this moment.
The source material actually has a great, highly specific joke about this. Horowitz talks about the employee leaving your office and doing the shmoney dance down the hallway because they're so thrilled.
Yeah, exactly.
You get to play the role of the benevolent king raining down gold on your loyal subjects. It feels fantastic.
You grant the raise, the employee is ecstatic,
Yep.
and you convince yourself you've secured a critical asset for the company. You feel like a great boss. But once again, we have fallen into the trap of the closed loop.
We forgot the unseen audience.
We completely ignore the unseen audience. We have to shift our focus to the employee who is not in the room.
The quiet worker.
Yes.
The person who is heads down, grinding away, who hates confrontation.
The quiet worker is the linchpin of this entire dynamic.
Huh.
Imagine a second employee on that exact same team. By every objective metric, this second employee is actually performing better than the person who just demanded the raise.
Wow, okay.
Their code is cleaner, their closing rate is higher, their projects ship faster, but their personality is different. They despise office politics. They believe their work should speak for itself. They have not marched into your office to demand more money.
Here's the reality of every office on Earth. Salaries are never as secret as management desperately hopes they are. People talk. They go out for drinks, they complain, they compare notes. Eventually, that quiet, high-performing worker is going to find out that their louder colleague just got a significant bump in pay.
And when that realization hits, the cultural conclusion the quiet employee draws is catastrophic for your organization.
How so?
They look at the situation and realize that the quality of their work is actually irrelevant to their compensation. What is actually being evaluated, rewarded, and monetized by leadership is the willingness to aggressively demand money.
Wow. It's turning the company into a hostage negotiation where the currency is equity and salary. You are inadvertently broadcasting to your entire staff that the squeaky wheel gets the grease and the quiet wheel just gets to carry the load.
The fallout is even more insidious than that.
Yeah.
You are fundamentally altering the psychological contract between the employee and the company.
Okay, explain that.
By proving that ad hoc raises are given to those who ask, you're teaching every single employee that they have a fiduciary duty to their families to constantly agitate for more money. Think about the logic. If the only mechanism to secure a raise is to ambush the boss and demand one, then any employee who cares about their financial future, their children's college fund, or their mortgage realizes they are acting irresponsibly if they aren't constantly threatening to leave.
They realize they're actively leaving money on the table, that their more aggressive coworkers are happily stooping up.
Exactly.
You are incentivizing a culture of constant low-grade extortion. If I'm the CEO, that sounds like a waking nightmare. You're going to have a line of people outside your door every single week, manufacturing competing job offers and demanding compensation adjustments.
It's exhausting.
You won't have time to build a product because you'll be too busy individually renegotiating the salaries of your entire staff.
And the quiet employees, the ones who refuse to play that exhausting political game, they won't come to your office to argue. They'll simply update their resumes and leave.
They just vanish.
Yep. They will go find an organization that proactively recognizes and rewards their output without requiring them to beg for it.
So how do you prevent this cultural decay?
Well, the Y Combinator curriculum argues that the only defense against the squeaky wheel is the implementation of a strict, unyielding formal review process. You have to establish a categorical rule that you do not give out ad hoc off-cycle raises just because someone asked.
Okay, let me push back on this because this introduces a massive paradox, especially in the context of Silicon Valley startups.
Sure.
Startups famously despise corporate bureaucracy. The whole pitch of joining a startup is that you avoid the slow, soul-crushing HR processes of massive conglomerates. The source material even pokes fun at this, noting that modern startups want everything to be organic. They want to be doing yoga, eating organic food, and keeping everything fluid and natural. Doesn't instituting a rigid corporate-style performance review cycle kill the exact nimble, aggressive vibe that makes a startup successful?
It's the great paradox of scaling a company. Founders resist process because they associate it with a loss of speed and a stifling of creativity. But in this specific instance regarding compensation, the formal process is the only thing that actually protects the culture they're trying so desperately to preserve.
The bureaucracy is the shield.
The bureaucracy is the shield.
Walk me through the mechanics of that shield. How does a review cycle actually diffuse the paranoia of the unseen audience?
By establishing a strict, predictable rhythm, let's say a comprehensive review every 6 months, where every single person in the company is evaluated simultaneously, you completely remove the anxiety of the unseen audience.
Because everyone knows when it's happening.
Right. You are establishing a systemic rule. You are telling your company, I do not react to threats. I do not give out raises because you cornered me in the hallway. But I promise you this, every 6 months, the system will pause. I will look deeply at every single person's raw output. I will gather peer feedback, and I will adjust compensation fairly across the board based strictly on merit.
So let's play out the squeaky wheel scenario under this new system. Your top performer marches into your office in month 3 of the cycle and demands a 20% raise. What is the script?
The script requires immense discipline from the leader.
I bet.
You listen to them, you validate their hard work, and then you say, I am thrilled with your performance and I hear your request. But we do not do off-cycle compensation adjustments. I am taking all of your accomplishments and putting them directly into your file for our formal review process in 3 months. At that time, your compensation will be evaluated against the entire company, and you will get exactly what the system determines is fair.
Yeah, it's tough.
And then you have to hold that line.
Yeah.
If you cave even once, the system collapses and everyone goes back to aggressively demanding raises.
The genius of that is how it lowers the baseline temperature of the entire office. If I'm the quiet, heads-down worker, I can actually breathe. I don't have to carry the mental burden of wondering if I'm being aced out of my fair share just because I don't play golf with the CEO or because I don't have the bravado to kick down their door.
Exactly.
I know with absolute certainty that the system is going to actively look at my code, my sales numbers, my tangible output every 6 months. The system, not my aggression, becomes the arbiter of fairness.
And this realization represents a profound maturation point for a founder. When you accept that relying on your own ad hoc, moment-to-moment decisions destroys culture, you realize that a leader's actual job isn't making individual people happy in the moment.
Right.
A leader's job is designing a machine that produces the right outcomes automatically over time. Your job is to build the system, which transitions us perfectly into the fundamental architecture of output.
This is where we dive into Keith Rebwa's philosophy on operating a company, and it provides such a clarifying lens. We spend an inordinate amount of time in the business world talking about leadership, using these incredibly vague, inspirational platitudes. Inspire your team, find your why.
It's a lot of fluff.
It is. But the sources pull a stark, highly clinical definition of management from Andy Grove, the legendary former CEO of Intel. Grove defined the job of a manager with an incredibly simple mathematical equation.
I love this equation.
It's brilliant. The output of a manager is the output of their organization, plus the output of the neighboring organizations under their influence. That is it. It strips away all the ego. You are not evaluated on how smart you are, how many hours you work, or how visionary your speeches are. You are evaluated solely on the total, tangible output of the people around you.
It's a ruthless, beautiful clarification of duty. Your personal productivity is no longer the metric of success. Don't confuse motion with progress. And Rebwa utilizes a brilliant conceptual framework to explain how a leader must fundamentally rewire their own brain to achieve this as a company scales.
The writer to editor shift?
Exactly. It's the transition from being a writer to being an editor.
Let's expand on that analogy because it perfectly captures the friction of scaling. When you start a company or when you're an individual contributor, your entire identity is built around being a writer. You are staring at the blank page. You are the one generating the code. You're designing the user interface. You're cold calling the clients. You are generating the raw, chaotic material of the business from scratch.
You're doing the doing.
Yes. But the moment you become a manager, continuing to act like a writer is actually destructive. Your job has fundamentally changed. You have to become the editor.
The psychological shift required here is immense. The writers, your employees, are now the ones doing the raw work. They're generating the drafts. As the editor, your job is to clarify, simplify, and ruthlessly enforce the standard of quality.
Right.
An editor at a newspaper doesn't panic and rewrite the entire article themselves just because the first draft is messy.
Though I'm sure they want to sometimes.
Oh, they definitely do, but they shouldn't. They look at the draft, they identify the structural flaws, and they guide the writer. They say, this opening argument is confusing. You need more data to support this claim in paragraph 3. The tone of the conclusion is too aggressive. They refine the output of others to ensure it meets the standard.
But that brings us to the hardest practical question for any new manager. How do you actually know when to edit with a heavy hand, bleeding red ink all over the page, and when to step back and just let the writer find their own voice?
That's the million-dollar question.
If you edit too heavily, you're a micromanager and everyone hates you. If you step back too far, the product ships with massive errors and the company fails. How do you calibrate that balance without just guessing?
Well, Grove provided a highly specific diagnostic tool for this exact dilemma. He called it task-relevant maturity.
Task-relevant maturity.
Yeah, it's a somewhat academic phrase, but the underlying concept is a lifesaver. Before you manage any employee on any specific task, you must ask yourself one question. Has this individual successfully completed this exact highly specific task before? You're not evaluating their general intelligence, and you're not evaluating their overall seniority. You're evaluating their maturity in this one isolated domain.
So it's about decoupling their title from the work in front of them. Let's run a hypothetical. You have a brilliant senior engineer. They've been coding for a decade. They're the smartest technical mind in the building. If you ask them to architect a complex new database system, their task-relevant maturity for that specific job is incredibly high.
Off the charts. And because their task-relevant maturity is high, your management style for that project must be pure delegation. You give them the overarching goal, you agree on a timeline, and then you get completely out of their way.
Because if you don't...
If you try to micromanage their database architecture, you will infuriate them and slow them down. But let's say the company grows, and you ask that exact same brilliant senior engineer to suddenly manage a team of 5 junior developers. They have never managed humans before. They have never conducted a performance review. Their task-relevant maturity for the domain of management is essentially 0.
They are a novice again, even though they have a senior title.
Exactly. So for the task of management, you must treat them like an absolute beginner. You have to micromanage them. You have to sit in on their one-on-ones. You have to review the feedback they give their team. You have to be deeply involved until they build maturity in that new skill. This shatters the myth that a great leader should have one consistent management style.
Consistency in management style is actually a flaw.
It is.
That is a fascinating counterintuitive point. We are taught to be consistent, but you're saying that if you do reference checks on a truly elite executive, the feedback should actually be contradictory.
Yes.
Half the people who worked for them should tell you, oh, they're a massive micromanager, they were in the weeds on every detail, and the other half should tell you, they were incredible, they gave me total autonomy and never checked in.
If you get that contradictory feedback, it means the leader is correctly deploying their style based on the task-relevant maturity of their people. It is a feature, not a bug. And mastering this framework is what allows a leader to identify the most critical assets in their organization. Rabois categorizes all employees into 2 distinct archetypes: ammunition and barrels.
Ammunition and barrels. This is such a visceral way to view talent. Let's break down the ammunition first. And we should clarify, being ammunition is not an insult. These are highly competent, intelligent, hardworking people.
They are the bulk of any successful workforce. Ammunition refers to people who will execute a plan flawlessly, but they require a target. If you give them a detailed specification, a clear set of instructions, and a defined goal, they will put their head down and produce excellent work. But they lack the specific psychological mechanism to determine what the goal should be in the first place, or how to navigate ambiguous obstacles when the initial plan fails. They need a manager to point them in the right direction.
And the barrels.
Barrels are the incredibly rare, high-leverage individuals who can take a vague, poorly defined idea from inception and drive it all the way to completion. They figure out the scope of the problem. They laterally source the necessary resources. When they hit a roadblock, they invent a workaround. Most importantly, they pull other people the ammunition along with them.
They just make it happen.
They don't just execute the work. They absorb the ambiguity and generate momentum. As a founder, your ultimate constraint on growth is not capital. It is the number of true barrels you have in your organization. Your primary job is to find your barrels and aim them at your most existential threats.
But identifying a barrel is notoriously difficult. People don't put barrel on their LinkedIn profiles.
No, they don't.
And resumes are completely useless for this because everyone claims they're a self-starter who takes initiative. How do you actually test for this trait in the real world? The Y Combinator material highlights a highly specific, almost absurd diagnostic test that Rabois used. It's essentially a test of lateral problem solving under pressure. I like to call it the smoothie test.
The smoothie test sounds trivial, but it maps perfectly to executive function and cognitive load. The scenario is this. Rabwa noticed that a group of key engineers were consistently working incredibly late, pushing past 9:00 p.m. to hit a deadline. He wanted to reward them and boost morale by ensuring that cold, fresh smoothies were delivered to their desks at exactly 9:00 p.m. every night.
Which, on a whiteboard, sounds like a simple task. Go get smoothies.
Well,
But practically, logistically, coordinating the delivery of highly perishable custom beverages to a specific secure office location late at night when most healthy places are closed is a massive headache. There's no simple button to push to make it happen.
it's a problem riddled with micro-ambiguities. So, Rabwa would assign this task to a new employee. He wouldn't give them instructions. He would just give them the goal. I need fresh smoothies here at 9 p.m. for the engineering team. If the employee was ammunition, they would immediately bounce the cognitive load back to him.
They'd have a million questions.
They'd come back with a list. Where should I order them from? What flavors did they like? How do I expense this? Who's going to let the delivery driver into the lobby at night?
Yeah.
They required the manager to solve the micro problems so they could just execute the final step.
They're essentially asking the editor to write the draft for them.
Exactly. But if the employee was a barrel, they simply absorbed the ambiguity. They didn't ask questions. They used their personal credit card. They called a shop across town. They bribed an intern to go pick them up. They found a cooler, whatever it took. At 9:00 p.m., the smoothies magically appeared on the desks, cold and correct, and Rabwa never heard a word about the logistics. They proved they could handle a complex, lateral problem without draining the manager's time.
So, once an employee passes the smoothie test, how do you cultivate them? You don't just leave them in charge of beverages.
No, you immediately expand their scope. You give them a slightly larger, slightly more consequential problem. Maybe next week, you tell them to reorganize the entire onboarding process for new engineers. And if they solve that autonomously, you expand their scope again. You hand them a product launch. You continually increase the weight of the ambiguity you hand them until the system breaks.
Until they fail.
Until they fail. That break point is incredibly valuable data. It tells you exactly what their current maximum capacity is. You stretch your entire organization until you locate your true barrels.
Okay, so a founder follows this playbook. If you're managing a team right now and you do this, you set up formal review processes, you identify your barrels, you're functioning as an editor, it sounds like you've built a well-oiled machine.
It does.
But the source material warns of a massive psychological trap that nearly all high-achieving founders and managers fall into right at this inflection point of scaling. Let's delve into the paradox of control, or what Sam Altman famously diagnoses as hero mode.
Hero mode is arguably the most dangerous phase of a company's life cycle because it is a catastrophic structural failure masquerading as a heroic work ethic.
Oh, that's dangerous.
It is the moment where the virtues that got the company off the ground, hustle, grit, doing things that don't scale, suddenly become the exact forces that will strangle the company to death.
Let's ground this in Altman's specific example. Imagine the manager of a customer support team at a rapidly growing startup. The product has just hit product market fit, sales are exploding, and consequently, the volume of inbound customer support tickets is skyrocketing. The queue is overflowing.
A good problem, but a huge problem.
Right. This manager is deeply invested in the company. They don't want to be a detached bureaucrat. They want to lead from the front. So instead of stopping to systematically hire and train new support reps, they decide to just outwork the problem. They roll up their sleeves and start working an 18-hour day to clear the ticket queue themselves.
And the insidious part of hero mode is that for a brief, fleeting moment, it actually works.
Yeah.
The manager burns the midnight oil, the queue hits zero, and the customers are happy. The manager gets a massive rush of adrenaline and feels like the savior of the company.
The hero.
The hero. But the underlying math hasn't changed. The company is still growing. The volume of tickets continues to rise. So the 18-hour day inevitably becomes a 19-hour day, then a 20-hour day. The manager is chronically exhausted, approaching physical burnout. Their personal life is disintegrating, but they flatly refuse to stop and hire help.
It's like a triage doctor in a war zone deciding the line of wounded is too long, so they stop diagnosing and just start frantically handing out bandages themselves. They're moving faster, but they've completely abandoned their structural role.
Exactly.
Why is it so incredibly difficult for smart, capable people to just stop and hire help? Why won't they pull the ripcord?
Because of the terror of the immediate drop-off.
What do you mean?
Hiring takes a tremendous amount of time. You have to write a job description, source candidates, conduct hours of interviews, and then spend weeks training the new hire before they're actually useful. If this manager, who is barely keeping the queue alive by working 20 hours a day, stops working for even one afternoon to conduct interviews, the queue will explode.
Oh, I see.
They will miss SLAs, customers will be furious, and the manager will feel like they are personally failing the company. They are trapped in a cognitive loop where they cannot afford the time it takes to build capacity, but they cannot survive if they keep running at this pace.
So what is the escape hatch? How do you break a high achiever out of hero mode before they physically collapse or destroy the department?
The only way out requires a violent psychological shift. The manager has to consciously, deliberately choose to let the system fail in the short term.
Let it fail.
Yes. They have to look at the overflowing ticket queue, look at the angry emails and say, I am going to let these tickets pile up. I am going to let our response times drop to unacceptable levels for the next 3 weeks. I'm going to allow the customers to be angry because I must step away from the front line, spend these 3 weeks aggressively hiring and training 3 new barrels so that we can build the long-term structural capacity to handle 10 times this volume.
Wow. You have to accept acute public failure today to ensure survival tomorrow. That goes against every instinct a founder has.
It does.
And even when they finally accept that they need to delegate, they usually botch the execution. Why is true delegation so terrifying for founders?
Because founders deeply confuse delegation with cloning. Yes. When a founder in hero mode finally hands a task to an employee, they usually say, here is the problem. I want you to solve it by doing exactly step A, then step B, then step C in the exact sequence and tone that I would use. They are not trusting the employee's judgment. They are just renting their hands.
Right.
That isn't delegation. It's micromanagement masquerading as offloading. And it doesn't scale because the founder still has to generate the entire cognitive roadmap for the task.
You're treating an intelligent hire like a meat robot. You aren't buying their brain, just their bandwidth.
Real delegation requires a terrifying leap of faith. True delegation sounds like this. You are incredibly smart. That is the entire reason I hired you. Here is the deep context of the problem we are facing. Here is the ultimate outcome we need to achieve. Now I am stepping back. You determine the steps. You make the decisions on how to get there. I trust your judgment. You are delegating the cognitive load, not just the physical labor.
I can hear the objection forming in the listener's head right now because there is one massive historical counterexample to this entire theory of delegation. Steve Jobs.
Ah, yes, the Steve Jobs myth.
Jobs famously made every single decision at Apple. He didn't just set the vision, he was deeply involved in the exact curvature of the glass on the iPhone, the specific shade of white on the packaging, the layout of the retail stores. He was the ultimate unrepentant micromanager, and he used that style to build the most valuable company in the history of capitalism. So why shouldn't founders just emulate Jobs?
That is the ultimate founder trap, and the Y Combinator curriculum explicitly addresses it. Steve Jobs is a historical anomaly.
A mutant, basically.
He possessed a mutant level of aesthetic taste, coupled with a virtually infinite cognitive bandwidth that allowed him to successfully micromanage an enterprise at a global scale. He was a 1 in a billion anomaly. But building your management philosophy on the premise that you are the next Steve Jobs is a guarantee of failure.
Because you aren't him.
Exactly. If you are a normal, highly intelligent human being and you refuse to delegate, you will not build Apple. You will simply become the primary bottleneck that slowly strangles your own organization to death. You have to build a machine that functions when you are not looking at it.
Okay, so let's say a leader internalizes this. They escape hero mode, they learn to genuinely delegate, they empower their barrels, and they build a system that scales. But now they face a new existential threat. How do you keep those barrels?
Retain.
Exactly. How do you retain the elite talent you just empowered? To keep the machine running, you have to rely on overarching systemic policies to bind people to the company. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating, complex, and controversial structural levers in all of Silicon Valley, the stock option power dynamic.
This topic is a masterclass in how a seemingly dry, deeply technical HR policy is actually the most profound tool of behavioral engineering a company possesses.
It really is.
The debate we're going to analyze was sparked by a highly influential blog post written by Sam Altman, dissecting the standard rules for exercising startup stock options.
For the listener who might not be deep in the weeds of startup equity mechanics, we need to clearly establish how this trap works.
Let's lay it out.
The standard, almost universally accepted rule across tech startups is this. If you leave a company, whether you resign voluntarily to go somewhere else or whether you get fired, you have exactly a 90-day window to exercise your vested stock options. If you do not formally purchase those options within 90 days of your termination date, they evaporate. You lose them forever, and they are returned to the company's equity pool.
That is the standard 90-day rule. Now, we have to look at the mathematical reality of what that actually means for an employee, because the tax implications create a brutal trap. Let's walk through a very common scenario.
Okay, walk me through it.
You join a hot, early-stage startup. Your equity package vests over 4 years. You grind it out, you help build the product, and by year 3, the company's valuation has absolutely exploded. On paper, your vested options might be worth $10 million.
Which is life-changing generational wealth. It's the entire reason people work at startups.
It is life-changing, but only on paper, because options are not stock. They are merely the right to buy the stock at your original low strike price.
Right.
To actually lock in that $10 million value, you have to exercise them. And the moment you exercise them, the IRS hits you with a massive tax bill, usually under the alternative minimum tax, based on the paper gain.
Even though you haven't sold any stock yet.
Exactly. So to get your $10 million in illiquid stock, you might have to write a cash check for $2.5 million right now just to cover the strike price and the taxes.
And the tragic reality is that almost no normal employee, even a highly compensated senior software engineer, has $2.5 million in liquid cash just sitting in their checking account. Their wealth is entirely trapped in the illiquid stock of the company.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's apply the 90-day rule to this math. If this employee wants to quit because they are burned out, or worse, if they're suddenly fired, a ticking clock starts. They have exactly 90 days to magically source $2.5 million in cash.
Which is impossible for most people.
If they cannot secure a massive loan or find secondary buyers within 3 months, they lose their entire $10 million windfall. They walk away with absolutely nothing to show for years of grueling work.
It's a terrifying scenario. Sam Altman looked at this dynamic and basically called it out as structurally predatory. He argued that this 90-day window artificially traps people in jobs they might hate simply because they can't afford the tax bill to leave.
He did.
Altman championed a solution proposed by Adam D'Angelo, extending the exercise window from 90 days to 10 years. Give departing employees a full decade to figure out the cash or wait for an IPO so they don't lose their life's work just because they transition to a new phase of their career. Altman argued that from a purely ethical standpoint, every single startup should adopt this 10-year rule.
The 10-year rule sounds incredibly benevolent. It sounds humane, progressive, and deeply ethical.
It does.
But Ben Horowitz, analyzing this exact same proposal, pulls us violently back to our core principle: the unseen audience.
Here we go.
You cannot evaluate a structural policy solely from the perspective of the individual who is suffering in the moment.
Yeah.
You have to rigorously analyze how that policy shifts the incentives for every other actor in the system.
Let's do that. Let's run a multi-perspective analysis on the stock option window. Let's start with the perspective that Altman was protecting the fired employee.
From the perspective of the fired employee, the 90-day rule is a profound, almost unimaginable injustice. Imagine you were called into the CEO's office and told you are being let go. That is traumatic enough.
Absolutely.
But the hidden financial subtext of that firing is, and because we know you don't have $2.5 million in liquid cash to cover the AMT taxes, we are also effectively confiscating all the wealth you built for us over the last 3 years. It feels like the company is literally stealing from you on your way out the door. It breeds immense radioactive bitterness. That fired employee is going to tell every engineer in their network that your company is predatory and will weaponize the tax code against them.
That is a massive reputational risk for a founder.
Yeah.
It makes total sense why Altman wanted to close that vulnerability. But who is the unseen audience here? Who is watching this play out?
The unseen audience is the critical core of your company. The employees who are staying,
Right.
the people who are grinding out the 12-hour days, dealing with the immense stress of scaling and fighting to keep the company alive.
Mhm.
Imagine you were one of those loyal, high-performing employees. You watch your coworker decide to quit. Maybe they're burned out. Maybe they just want to go travel the world, or maybe you want to join a competitor.
Okay.
Under Altman's 10-year rule, that coworker gets to walk out the door entirely risk-free and keep all the upside of their equity. They get to hold on to their lottery ticket for a decade without contributing another ounce of labor to the company.
Ugh. The psychology of that is devastating. If I'm the employee who stayed behind, I'm sitting at my desk at 9:00 p.m. on a Tuesday carrying the workload of the person who just quit. And I look at the situation and think, wait a minute. Why am I still here enduring the stress? They left, they took all their equity with them, and they have zero risk. They're at the beach, and if the company IPOs it, they both get rich. Am I the sucker for staying? Should I just vest my stock and quit too?
You have just articulated the free rider problem. The 90-day rule is not merely a legal footnote. It is a brutal, highly effective retention tool. It acts as golden handcuffs.
Golden handcuffs.
By making it financially devastating to leave the company before a liquidity event, you enforce absolute loyalty. Now, the philosophical question is that the right kind of loyalty? Are you retaining a team of passionate mercenaries who are highly aligned on an outcome, or are you just trapping exhausted hostages who resent you? That is the true debate.
It is behavioral engineering at its most ruthless. You are using the tax code to force people to stay in the trenches.
It is. And Horowitz's synthesis of this debate is brilliant because he flatly refuses to take a moral side. He argues that there is no single, objectively right answer. As a founder, you simply have to decide with clear eyes what kind of culture you are actually building.
So it's a choice.
You can choose the 10-year rule and signal to the world. We guarantee absolute fairness. We will not trap you. What you earned is yours, regardless of your personal liquidity. But you have to accept the structural consequence. You will likely lose key people during hard times because they have no financial handcuffs keeping them in the building.
Or you retain the brutal 90-day rule, and your cultural signal is stark. We aggressively, exclusively reward those who stay in the trenches. If you abandon the mission, you abandon your upside. We are a mercenary unit, and all the spoils go to the people who stay on the ship until it docks.
Exactly. You just have to be intentional. You cannot pull a massive structural lever like equity without understanding the systemic psychological consequences it will unleash on the people who stay.
Which brings us to the absolute climax of this deep dive. Because everything we've discussed so far, the demotions, the formal review processes, the psychology of delegation, the stock options, these are all corporate examples. They're about navigating unseen perspectives in the relatively safe confines of a modern office setting.
Right.
But the source material provides an ultimate, breathtaking case study, a historical example where the mechanics of management and structural decision-making were applied not to startup equity, but to literal life, death, and the genesis of national sovereignty.
This is, without exaggeration, one of the most profound management and leadership case studies in recorded history. We are analyzing Toussaint Louverture, the leader of the Haitian Revolution in the late 18th century. It stands alone as the only completely successful slave revolution in human history.
To truly comprehend the magnitude of Toussaint's decision-making, we have to unflinchingly establish the baseline of brutality he was operating within. The French colony of Santo Domingo, which is modern-day Haiti, was a sugar plantation economy. And the cultivation of sugar required a uniquely horrific, mathematically calculated cost structure and culture of violence. The Y Combinator text explicitly contrasts this with American slavery, which was horrific in its own right, but the sheer scale of the death toll in Santo Domingo is staggering. Over the course of the Atlantic slave trade, roughly 1 million slaves were brought to the United States, and by the end of the era, the population had grown to roughly 4 million.
Right.
In the Caribbean sugar colonies, 2 million slaves were brought over, and by the end, only 700,000 survived.
It was an industrial meat grinder. The text notes that owners routinely tortured slaves to death for incredibly minor infractions, roasting people alive, blowing them up with gunpowder, feeding them to insects. It was a regime of absolute terror designed to extract maximum labor before death.
It's just horrific.
It is. This was the environment Toussaint Louverture was born into. This was the deep, unimaginable trauma burned into the psychology of every single person he was attempting to lead.
And yet, despite emerging from that abyss of horror, Toussaint developed a staggering 3-part vision for his revolution. He didn't just want a chaotic revolt or a temporary escape. He wanted 3 specific, monumental outcomes. 1, completely end the institution of slavery. 2, take full sovereign control of the country. And 3, and this is the part that reveals his genius, he wanted to build a world-class, first-tier nation that could compete economically on the global stage.
That third goal, economic prosperity, is the key to understanding his leadership. He realized that freedom without a functioning economy would just lead to a failed state that would eventually be reconquered.
Right.
To achieve a first-tier nation, he had to master the unseen perspectives of every single faction on the island, including the very people who had tortured his people. He had to systematically suppress every natural, deeply justified human instinct for violent revenge in favor of long-term structural integrity. Let's examine his first massive challenge, conquering the enemy.
He's leading an army of formerly enslaved people, and he is fighting off the Spanish, the British, and the massive French forces. And his army, understandably, wants blood. When they conquer a European force or seize a plantation, the soldiers want to pillage, loot, and execute their former oppressors.
Of course they do. From the individual soldier's perspective, it is pure, justified retribution. They tortured us, they murdered our families, now it is our turn. To the victor go the spoils.
Yeah.
But Toussaint looked at the situation through the lens of the future culture of the nation he was trying to build. He recognized that the existing culture of the enslaved population had been fundamentally broken and degraded by the trauma of the plantations. If he allowed his army to give in to their basest instincts to pillage and murder, he would simply be institutionalizing chaos. He would be training them to be warlords, not citizens of a world-class society.
So he takes an incredibly hard line. He strictly forbids pillaging. The sources even note he went so far as to forbid infidelity among his top officers. He was obsessed with establishing a rigid, high-minded, disciplined moral culture to overwrite the trauma of slavery. But what he did with the conquered European leaders is the most shocking tactical decision of the entire revolution.
He did not execute the captured French and British commanders. He looked at them purely as assets.
Facets.
He recognized that these men possessed elite, world-class military expertise, knowledge of artillery, logistics, and European infantry tactics. Knowledge his army desperately needed. So he made the astonishing decision to integrate them. He made the European commanders generals in his own army.
He took the men who crossed the ocean to keep him in chains, and he gave them high-ranking, authoritative positions in his military to absorb their knowledge. That is an almost superhuman level of pragmatism. The source notes he was heavily inspired by Julius Caesar's tactics of integrating conquered foes, but applied in an infinitely more volatile, racially charged context.
It completely short-circuited the Europeans' expectations. They expected savage, chaotic revenge. When they were met with extreme military discipline, dignity, and an offer of high rank based on merit, their psychological framing shattered, and their loyalty shifted entirely to Toussaint. But military victory was only the first step. The economic problem was infinitely more complex.
The plantation owners.
Yes, this brings us to the ultimate structural dilemma, managing the slave owners after the war was won.
Right. Toussaint has won the war. He controls the territory. The newly freed population looks at the plantation owners who are still there and says, "You tortured us. This is our land now. We are taking the plantations and we are executing you."
Which is the basic historical rule of conquest. The victors take the land. But Toussaint has to consider the cold, hard economic reality of the global sugar trade. He wants a world-class nation. That requires massive export revenue to buy arms and build infrastructure.
And sugar is the only way to get that revenue.
Exactly. And the only viable export on the island is sugar. Toussaint and his army were brilliant fighters, but they did not know how to manage the incredibly complex logistics of global sugar exportation. And they certainly didn't have the international banking and shipping relationships to trade the sugar if they managed to grow it. The European owners held all of that intellectual and relational capital.
But the plantation owners are sitting there looking at their ledgers. They know the brutal math of the sugar economy. It only functioned on the premise of free labor. They had massive capital tied up in the land. If they suddenly have to pay wages to the massive workforce, their cash flow collapses. The math simply doesn't work. They face bankruptcy.
So put yourself in Toussaint's shoes. How do you reconcile an impossible math problem with an impossible moral problem?
That seems impossible.
You have a traumatized, newly freed population rightfully demanding the land and vengeance, and you have an owner class who claims the entire economy will instantly collapse if they're forced to pay wages.
So how did he do it? Toussaint's structural solution is an absolute masterpiece of systemic design. First, he enforces the absolute end of slavery. The workers must be paid fair wages for their labor unconditionally.
Yes.
But he makes a highly controversial demand of his own people. He forces the freed slaves to return to the plantations as paid laborers. He forbids them from simply seizing the land and dividing it up into subsistence farms. And to solve the owner's math problem, to prevent them from going bankrupt due to the massive new wage costs, he allows the owners to keep their land, and he drastically lowers their taxes to mathematically subsidize the cost of the new wages.
It is breathtaking. He defeated the slave owners in a brutal war, abolished slavery, forced them to pay wages, and then gave them a massive tax cut.
It sounds insane if you just look at it emotionally.
If you look at it emotionally, it sounds like treason. But if you look at it through a structural lens, it is flawless. By subsidizing the wages through tax cuts, he maintained the economic engine of the country. The owners stayed, utilizing their global trade networks to export the product. The workers got their freedom, physical safety, and steady wages, and the overall economy roared back to life.
The historical results speak for themselves. Because he possessed the sheer intellectual discipline to balance the unseen perspectives of the enslaved, the owners, the enemy generals, and the future needs of the nation, he achieved the impossible. Because of this structural brilliance, he eventually defeated the massive forces sent by Napoleon, and for a brief period under Toussaint's leadership, Haiti actually generated higher export revenue than the entire United States.
It is the ultimate historical testament to Ben Horowitz's rule. Toussaint Louverture did not make decisions based on his own deeply justifiable rage. He did not make decisions based on the immediate emotional demands of the people in the room with him. He made decisions by rigorously synthesizing the unseen perspectives of every single actor in the complex system, and he designed an architecture where their competing incentives aligned to produce prosperity.
It is truly staggering history, and it brings us to our synthesis for today. We have traversed from the granular debates over Silicon Valley stock options to the battlefields of the 18th century, but the core truth connecting all of it remains identical. Managing a team, whether it's 5 software engineers trying to ship an app or a revolutionary army trying to forge a nation, is a continuous, unforgiving act of designing a complex system. It requires the ability to hold immense, genuine empathy for the human beings you lead, while simultaneously possessing the discipline to make cold, deeply structural decisions.
It is a delicate, often painful balance. You have to meticulously design the machinery of your organization so that it automatically rewards the right behaviors and relentlessly discourages the wrong ones, but you must implement that machinery with deep humanity. Which brings me to a final grounding quote from the legendary Silicon Valley executive coach, Bill Campbell.
Oh, I love Bill Campbell.
When discussing the absolute hardest decision a manager ever has to execute firing someone, Campbell established a golden rule. You have to take their job, but you don't have to take their dignity.
That perfectly encapsulates the dual mandate of leadership. The structural machinery dictates that the failing executive must lose their job to protect the company. But the humanity dictates how you deliver that news. Because how you handle the exit of one person is a direct, unavoidable broadcast to the surviving organization about your fundamental character. The unseen audience is always watching how you treat the fallen.
So as we conclude this deep dive, we want to connect this directly back to you, the listener. You're going to face these moments. The next time you are sitting in your chair, faced with a critical decision, whether you are resolving a bitter dispute between 2 key coworkers, determining who gets a promotion, or setting a new remote work policy for your team, force yourself to pause.
Step out of the room. Step out of the immediate suffocating tension of the one-on-one conversation. Ask yourself the hard questions. How will the quiet high performer view this decision? How will the brand new hire view this? How does this choice alter the invisible rules of the game I am asking everyone in this building to play?
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you go back to your day. We usually define management as the act of managing people, directing their specific actions, correcting their immediate mistakes, evaluating their output. But what if that is entirely wrong? What if true management is actually about managing the spaces between people?
The spaces between, that's powerful.
Yes. The unspoken rules, the hidden incentive structures, the friction points, and the invisible audience watching every single move you make. You cannot control human irrationality. People will always be messy, emotional, and unpredictable. But you can design the architecture of your civilization. If you can master the space between, the people will manage themselves.
You start out your career thinking management is an engineering problem. You think it's binary, it's either broken or not broken. You think you can look at the organizational chart like an X-ray and find a clean, straight line to fix the issue. But the reality of leadership is that you are always operating in muddy waters. The true genius of leadership is learning how to swim in them and eventually how to build a bridge over them. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of decision-making. We will catch you on the next one.